Last September, I wrote a memo titled, "Shall We Repeal the Laws of Economics?" in which I described economies as organic entities that operate on their own, pursuant to some underlying laws. The best known is the law of supply and demand. In general, people will buy more of something as the price goes down and produce more of it as the price goes up. Another has to do with incentives. In general, people will allocate resources, such as their labor, to the activities for which they will be best rewarded. These and the rest of the rules are straightforward, and it doesn't take a PhD to understand them. In fact, they're part of human nature. But governments sometimes want outcomes different than those a free-functioning economy will produce. To that end, they enact rules and regulations designed to override the laws of economics. Some governments even go so far as to adopt socialism or communism, creating economies where government commands take over entirely from the laws of economics. Rent control. A prime example discussed in my September memo was rent control. When demand for apartments exceeds supply, it's only natural that rents will rise, perhaps eventually to the point where people who live in a given location can't afford to continue doing so. But elected officials typically want to preserve neighborhoods. They want their constituents to be able to continue renting apartments in their districts and not lose out to others who can pay more. To deliver on this aspect of constituent service, they pass laws to limit rent increases. Now, people who otherwise couldn't afford to live in the jurisdiction can do so. Those tenants are happy, and that makes the elected officials happy, as happy constituents tend to vote for incumbents. But not everyone is happy. Landlords are unhappy about not being able to charge the full rent they could charge in a free market. So they stop investing in their apartments and sometimes take them off the market. Developers who might be interested in building new apartments refrain from doing so out of concern that they won't be able to earn a sufficient return. Also unhappy are people who would like to live in that location and can afford to pay market rents, but are unable to find vacant apartments because they're occupied by people paying below market rents. There are at least two things wrong with this situation. The first is that governments are choosing winners and losers rather than letting market forces do so. In the case of rent control, the people who occupy apartments and potentially political incumbents are the winners, but landlords, developers, and people looking for apartments are the losers. The elected officials enacting rent control will say they're only trying to produce fairness for existing occupants, but they're obviously treating others unfairly. In addition, there are negative implications for society overall. Tenants living in rent-controlled apartments enjoy a very valuable asset, a bargain-priced place to live. But there's no way to monetize that asset. They can only enjoy the benefit by continuing to live there. For this reason, they tend not to move, reducing mobility for themselves and everyone else. Rent control also discourages the upgrading of existing apartments and the construction of new apartments. So the housing stock fails to keep up with the needs of the community in terms of both condition and quantity. In other words, governments can limit the rents landlords can charge for their apartments, but they can't make developers build new ones. These things can reduce overall societal welfare and interfere with the movement of resources to the use where they're most productive.